Christina. Thank you for coming out here. We got some healthy food. So part of the reason I'm trying to keep it healthy, obviously eating good is always good, but I have a photo shoot and I'm not trying to be a complete pig and look all bloated when I get on camera. So I'm trying to keep it as healthy as possible.
Nice.
But for people who may not be familiar with both of you, if you want to introduce yourselves, Christina, if you want to introduce yourself, where would people know of you from, or what have you done?
I'm a journalist and a researcher. I almost exclusively write about gender affirming care and, the inadequacies of it and the poor evidence base supporting it and, the harm that it causes to people like detransitioners.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been my focus for the last couple of years.
Very nice. And you're also former leftist. Would you describe yourself as that?
Yeah, I think I've always been a liberal, but I kind of dabbled in progressivism for a little bit. During 2020, I got involved with some other activists who are a little on the extreme side. And this was just online activism. I wasn't out vandalizing.
It was good to know.
The rhetoric was a tad extreme.
Right.
And I've, since realized the error of my ways, and I've written about it a lot. And I call myself a former social justice warrior.
I think that's the term that you use. Yeah, former SJW. And Colin, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I'm an evolutionary biologist, perhaps best known for talking about why there's only two sexes, and that there are only two sexes. That sex isn't a spectrum. It's not a social construct. Basic biological concepts that everyone seemed to agree with, 10 years ago. I'm just trying to make sure that those ideas aren't forgotten, and I've been basically harping on that same point for the last 5 years. I'd like to think not to no avail. To definitely, I think it's improving the discourse and it's less taboo to say now. But that's basically what I've been known for. I've since pivoted a little bit. I'm still talking about the biology of sex and why that's important, because that underpins so much of the madness we're seeing with males competing in female sports, and also with the whole gender medicine sort of stuff that Christina also works on. Because the premise to a lot of the gender medicine stuff is that if sex isn't this definite categorical thing, if it's just an array of a bunch of different types of body parts, all of which can be sort of modified, that we can literally change your sex to sort of match your gender identity, as they would put it, or your we can change your assigned birth sex to match your brain sex, is how they also would say it. And so really, I just think the whole biology thing is fundamental to, it's at the root of many different issues related to sex and gender in our society. And so that's sort of why I harp on it so much, is because it's really fundamental.
Right.
That's what I've been talking about for the last 5 years, basically.
Wow. And now you have Richard Dawkins' support.
And now Richard Dawkins has come out in support of my lecture on on the reality that there's only two sexes, which...
It sounds ridiculous because it's so basic, but you're right. If we lose the fundamentals, then nothing else matters. So it's good that it sounds silly because it sounds so basic, but we have people who are trying to make you say everything that we've known, not just in the past 10 years, but since, I don't know, centuries.
Oh yeah.
That there are only two sexes of people. That's actually wrong.
Yeah.
We're always wrong.
Kind of the problem too is it was so basic and fundamental that it wasn't really needed to be clarified and defined well in law. So that's how the activists have been able to come in and kind of change the law to their liking. Mm-hmm. So now that there's a lot more legislation that Colin's involved in now that give a better definition of what sex is, because it just never people never really thought to that we needed a really clear definition of what sex was.
It's been a really bizarre experience because I've done some expert testimony for in Texas SB 14, which is they're basically trying to restrict or put age limits on who can receive sort of sex change surgeries and hormones, that type of stuff.
Right.
And so they called me in to be an expert witness to both write a testimony and to be there in court, like defending this stuff. So people say like, no one's denying that there's two sexes. You still hear people say that. It's like, well, then why am I in court here? Like with an ACLU lawyer, like cross-examining me, trying to undercut this whole process. But it's really bizarre because there's some what I consider like actual experts who are experts in really complex things. Like James Cantor was one of the expert witnesses there, and he was called in to talk about experimental design, standards of evidence, the whole pyramid of systematic reviews and expert opinion and all that stuff. And he's just a brilliant person who goes on and on about this stuff. And then like when I'm requested to like give my expert testimony, it's just like, in your expert opinion, and then they have like this like, what is a male? What is a female? Can you change sex? It's just like this kindergarten stuff that is shocking that they actually need someone who's a biologist to write this and just spell it out in just plain English.
Well, that's the thing. That's the thing I've noticed. It's not just biology, but it's all over the place. We have serious people in serious positions who are completely not serious. Like it's just asking unserious questions. It's very bizarre. That's why sometimes it's very like bizarre world, kind of thing. But this is even more of it. Like, so tell me, what is a man?
I heard Peter Boghossian put it a good way, and I hope I don't butcher it. But he's like, in the past, like intellectuals would always be very adamant about telling you like what they don't know. If they don't know something, they're not going to pretend. They're going to make all these caveats. But they've sort of switched recently to now pretending to not know things that they do know. And this is what I encounter all the time with biologists being like, well, we don't know what sex is. Like, what really is it? Does your gender identity influence your sex? It's like, clearly no. And like, there's no biologist who could actually believe that.
Right.
Yet here we are with everyone pretending that that's actually a thing.
But they get a lot of people like posing as biologists, like anthropologists and stuff like that, to write for Scientific American, saying sex is so complicated. We don't know what it is.
Yeah. My favorite is the most disingenuous when they find some rare species of creature.
Yeah.
And they say, well, listen, this species has like this weird thing. Like the males get pregnant and the females don't. No. So that must mean that it's not so binary. Like,
well, that was a big thing. So I wrote an article that was debunking a lot of that stuff. Because during Pride Month, you can just know that like all these organizations are going to put out these, all the nature organizations, whatever. Like I think the British Museum or the British Library. In Pride Month, we're highlighting, the Maori wrasse fish that changes sex, and then Scientific American has an article during Pride Month about like the sex changing abilities of clownfish or whatever, and it's just like. What is the relationship between Pride Month and sex-changing fish, unless they're trying to like draw this comparison that like humans can actually change their sex or something? Otherwise, like these fish would have nothing to do with humans or the LGBT community.
What I love when Richard Dawkins shared Colin's lecture, he did it. I mean, it was a big deal. We were really excited about it because we're huge Dawkins fans for a long, long time, but. He got like bombarded by all these activists in his comments with all these videos to like YouTube videos about clownfish and their reproductive strategies. And I'm like, do you guys know who you're talking to? So a few days later, he came out with this, I think probably like the spiciest Dawkins tweet on gender issues. And he called them like to the non-binary faithful or whatever. And just sort of rebutted all of their arguments. The same stuff that Colin's been doing for 4 years. Like, no.
Yeah. It's quite a good vindication. Just because a lot of the colleagues who called me, like, that I was a bigot, I was transphobic for talking about this stuff, they're all, like, and I know for a fact that they like, idolize Richard Dawkins as much as I did. He was one of the reasons I became an evolutionary biologist in the first place. And to have someone of like Dawkins' stature to like, share my talk and say that this was like a, I think he said superbly clear and totally correct lecture. And it's just like, I just know that any of my previous colleagues watching that, it's like, I'm definitely not fringe. If literally Richard Dawkins here, one of the most well-known and respected living biologists also agrees. So obviously it's not correct because Dawkins agrees with it. It's correct on its own, but it's good to see and get recognition from someone like him for sure.
Well, then I'll just say that he's extreme, and he's
That's what they're saying now.
yeah.
Yeah, they say he's transphobic.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's all it takes.
Yeah. It's not that I'm again. We're both extremists now, apparently.
Richard Dawkins, right-wing extremist.
It really is totally bizarre, but
Yeah, people are losing their minds.
it's a good place to be in right now, just because a lot more biologists can come forward and talk about this stuff now. I'd like to hope that I played a little bit of role.
Yeah, and now
Maybe they're-
everything's laid out.
Yeah.
Like, this is how you debunk all of those arguments. Like, we're not fish. We're humans, first of all.
How to debunk this argument? Humans are not fish.
Well, what exactly are fish then?
And then the other is the disorders of sex development.
Yeah, I mean, there's a million arguments, so there's rarely new ones that come out, but it's really bizarre because a lot of the people who make some of the arguments about, sex being a social construct or that there's more than two sexes, like those are actually like different types of arguments in and of itself. Like I would want to sit back and watch the people who say that there's 5 sexes debate the people who say that sex is a social construct,
Or
because
spectrum.
that's just as like incongruent with each other as they are with me. For some reason, like they just have a phobia of there being 2 sexes, but they're fine with like 5 or 10 or an infinite number. It's just like the number can't be 2.
Right. We see
some
the
reason.
same issues in like the gender medicine realm. There's these 2 different factions of trans activists. One is like the queer theorists, and they're like, gender is fluid and it changes, and that kind of like is completely contradictory to the people who believe in like an innate gender identity and it's in your brain. There's no empirical evidence to support that, but their positions both conflict with each other, because people say like, if gender is fluid, then why are you transitioning children?
Right.
If their gender identity is going to change later. So yeah, it's all a big mess.
It's definitely a big mess. I mean, for me, because we were talking before, like our political positions, I've always been kind of a liberal person, and now I'm kind of like an issue by issue type of person, where I focus on my principles.
Yeah.
And some things I'm kind of liberal on, some things I'm kind of conservative on. Just depends what it is.
Same.
And I think that when it comes to children, I didn't think it's a conservative position to say we shouldn't mutilate them.
Yeah.
Like, I would have thought the liberals 5 years ago would defend that.
Yeah, more Democrats are coming forward, though. We're
Yeah.
seeing like Democrats in 4 different states now have voted against policies on youth transition. And there's a new organization, Democrats for an Informed Approach to Gender, that's about to launch. And I feel the same. I call myself like a classical liberal, because it doesn't really dictate like or determine how you vote. It is based on like your principles, and issue by issue depends on who you believe is upholding those values,
Right.
depending on what policy they're offering.
I often wonder how it would look, because the left was majorly against things like gay conversion therapy, and rightfully so. Just leave the kids alone. They can express themselves however they want. Let them marry whoever they want. All that type of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And what really struck me with this whole gender stuff was that, to me, it seemed like just that similar, even more extreme conservative impulse to make people conform to gender roles. Previously with the gay conversion therapy, it was just like, oh, you're a man, you're attracted to other men. You should be attracted to women. We're gonna try to change your mind so it matches your bodies and make you actually attracted to women. And with the whole like gender surgery stuff, like most of these kids, they're quite sex non-conforming. Most of them end up being just gay adults.
Right.
And so, but now we're taking these kids and we're saying, oh, there's a mismatch between your brain and body, just like as the conservatives would say, but instead of changing your brain to match your body, we're going to change your body to match your brain now. And that's just like conversion therapy on steroids, literally. And it's really just like that. It just seems like if this was the right wing doing it, if Republicans were doing something like this, where they were clearly taking, sex non-conforming kids who were going to turn out to be most likely gay when they grow up, and they were trying to give them surgeries to make them straight, like,
Oh yeah.
that would just be the biggest scandal in the world. But because it's coming from the left-hand side and coming from the people who are, waving the rainbow flag or whatever the flag looks like now, it's somehow just, it's love and life-saving and everything like that. And I'm just sitting back just shocked at everything that's going on there, because I was never like a tribal political person. I was not like, I vote Democrat because I'm, vote blue no matter who type of thing. That's never been me. It's always been, as you said, you have your principles. Those are stable. You can change your principles if, based on life experience or whatever. But I ultimately look at the political playing field, try to identify where those principles are being expressed mostly. And in the past, they had been most well expressed, I think, on the sort of center left. And now I think they're better expressed, in my opinion, on sort of the center right and that liberal right position. And so that's kind of where I am right now. But again, it's not a political identity. It's just where those values, I think, are being currently expressed in their best form.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And, I'm a former Democrat myself. And part of the reason why I said I'm done with the party, and actually it took me some time to be like completely done with political parties in general and allegiance, is because the Democrats have allowed the most fringe people to take over.
Yeah.
And it's so disappointing to watch. They just start saying this stuff. And I'm sure both of you probably can tell the difference between someone who's giving lip service and someone who's a true believer. And so when I see Joe Biden saying, yeah, gender affirming care, like they wrote it down for him to say. He doesn't
I
know.
thought he was going to be a moderate president, because I associated him with Obama.
No,
And
he's got all these
progressive team of people running things.
That's exactly it. He's got the younger millennials who are working in the White House administration. They all went to the elite schools. They all believe this stuff. They're the ones who are curating all this stuff, and they're having these conferences and calls with him. And this is the position, right? And that, to me, anytime the president is of a particular party, that by de facto makes him kind of the leader of the party. And so when the leader of the party, Joe Biden, says these particular things, everybody follows suit. And that's disappointing to watch. And I'm just like, why have they allowed this to happen? There's no more. It feels like within the party itself, there are very, very few moderates. But I don't think they realize how extreme these people are. Like, they're basically communists, right? They're asking for revolution. They say these words. They want to dismantle. They want to make everybody uncomfortable. They want to do all these things. And these people are just like, well, listen, they don't like Donald Trump, so I'm with them. It's like, well, that's it. It's that low of a standard. Yeah. Anything against Donald Trump that you're just automatically for. So, in much of the same way, you chose your principles and you left the Daily Wire for that kind of similar reason. They were going to an extreme point and you didn't want to follow suit. And so you said, you know what, I'm out. And I think that is something that is admirable, because a lot of people would just kind of shut their mouth and just be like, well, it's not that bad. And you saw the writing on the wall. And I completely agree where your stance and choosing to leave and the reasons, like the examples that you gave, like with Michael Knowles saying these things. Because I think Michael Knowles is a smart guy and he knows what he is saying, and he knows how this can easily be used against him, and he doesn't care. And I think it's part of the media game. You get people who understand, who agree with them, who are, and then it's equally beneficial to have a whole bunch of haters and people that hate you, because that raises your profile as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, what the commentators at the Daily Wire aren't really clued into is there's a whole network of people who have been working for years, like, to make progress on this issue. They're the ones who have been able to get even like all the coverage that you've seen in the New York Times. Like, there's a coalition of people, mostly left-leaning, who have been working so hard to make progress on this issue and get them to cover it in like an objective and accurate way. And I just see when, people get up and say we're going to ban transgenderism from public life, it's like, it just hurts all these efforts that people are trying to make happen. And so now I quit, and I work sort of more closely now with these groups like GenSpect and
Gender Dysphoria Alliance. You're also there.
Yeah, I'm an advisor for Gender Dysphoria Alliance, and that's an organization that was created by some trans healthcare professionals, and we're trying to reach people on the left, because that's what the audience that matters the most. I mean, I think it's fine to invigorate your right-wing base to get laws passed. I support the laws that restrict medical transition treatments to adulthood, and but it's not going to change anybody's minds on the left, and those are the people whose minds really need to change the most. And
right.
We just had like the best coverage in the New York Times recently. I know all of those people who are interviewed in the article. Those are the people that I associate with, and I think that's going to have the biggest impact and really change things from the top. The people at the medical organizations, they're finally going to see like this path that they're on is not sustainable. Like, there are more detransitioners coming out now all the time.
Right.
What I think what you did at the Daily Wire is what we need to see people do who are politicians on the left, because you say everyone seems like they're extremists on the left right now. Alternatively, a lot of them are just cowards, and they're not actually saying anything when their principles are being violated because they're afraid about not getting reelected. They're afraid that AOC is going to dunk on them on social media, and they're going to be harassed and called all these names. I mean, the easiest thing for you to do with the Daily Wire would have been to not say anything and just go along with it. The easiest thing I could have done when I was in academia is to be like, oh, I'm just not going to talk about the biology of sex anymore, or the weird gender ideology stuff. But we just need people to not care if they can. And everyone, there's a lot of reasons why people don't maybe want to say something. Is it worth blowing up my entire career if I have a wife and kids and all this stuff, and they're all dependent on me? Like, I can understand why some situations could be, would lead someone to maybe not be, so outspoken on an issue. But if you can, then it's just so important to not just be cowed by that sort of pressure to remain silent when you have these things happening.
Yeah. And
that's I think is an incredibly important thing.
I keep trying to make is like, we have all the evidence on our side. We have the moral high ground. Like, it is a medical scandal, but the language that you choose matters, because you could otherwise just alienate people who would agree with you if you aren't, careful about how you talk about these issues. And like, it's not that hard. Like, just learn the arguments, learn, the evidence that we have on our side.
Right.
And lead with that. Like, you don't have to be a dick to people.
I mean, I'll say this. The one thing that I've noticed since we talked about the political shift, since being involved in the political shift, and being around people who are on the right, commentators, politicians, and stuff like that, the thing I've noticed is that they almost feel like convincing you is not their job.
Right.
And it's weird.
It's about like I think it has more to do with, there's too many people who aren't really like goal oriented. Like, their goal is just to like boost their own platform and their
Right.
own signal. And that's where you see a lot of people online being catty to each other because they're just signaling to their own base. They're just throwing them, the red meat.
Right.
And, it boosts their own profile.
Yeah, I think there's like several different types of people that are in it. You have like the talking heads who are just out there trying to say, provocative things to get clicks and that type of thing. You have just like the career activists who are on the ground, or all their goal is to just sort of, I guess, it's a laudable goal and it's necessary, like raise awareness about this, shining a light on all the crazy stuff that's happening and going out there and, raising a fuss about it. And that's a good thing to have.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's the other people who are like, they're involved in consciousness raising about it. That's what I do. We do a lot of that too. But there's also like we're actually in trying to get the text of the law changed because getting one word in a law of text changed to be better, like defining what sex is or whatever, or changing the laws restricting having age restrictions on child transitions, that type of stuff. Like that's worth just 1,000 op-eds and 1,000 protest signs. And so like those are, I think, there are three groups, and there's weird like conflicts between those groups as well that we're like currently seeing, where we're having like the activists are clashing with the people who are trying to actively do the nitty-gritty stuff to actually change the policies and things like that, because there's different goals. And if you're trying to really change the policies, you can't be an extreme activist just losing your mind in public. Like it does matter like the words you use and how you're perceived in some ways to gain trust of the people who may be on the left of the spectrum, that you need to gain their trust, otherwise they're just gonna reject everything you have to say.
Yeah.
And that kind of stuff does matter to the left. Like I throw out my liberal credentials all the time because they care about those things. And Colin, he has a PhD in evolutionary biology. That stuff, they care about those appeals to authority, and so we use them.
All that stuff is extremely important when it comes to, because the objective is to get as many people as possible to understand your side and your perspective.
Yeah.
So especially if you're talking about passing laws, well, why should we do this? Well, you want to compel them to agree. You don't want to force them, because that doesn't really work, or it works in a very short manner, unless you have a dictatorship or something like that, right? But we live in a free society, and so sometimes you have to put political pressure. How do you do that? Well, you get as many people as possible who want something, and give the impression also that a lot of people want this too, which is the activists are really good at giving the impression that this fringe minority is actually much bigger than it actually is. But we have to convince people to become sort of activists. We have to convince people to call their legislators, or to even just tacitly not allow certain things to happen within their own world, at their school and things like that. But if they think that this doesn't really exist, or they're only saying this because they want to do this instead, right? Like it's
We
well,
get called like right-wing bigots all the time.
Right. But here the problem is that the language part does matter, because I think language also shows sincerity. Do you actually care about protecting transgender children, or do you just hate trans people, right? And so you have to convince me that it's one, otherwise I'm going to think it's the other. So someone initially says, we need to protect the transgender children, that's all I care about, and people should be free. And then the next moment you should say, transgender should be abolished, right? Well, that's not the message that you initially led with. It sounds like you've moved to a more extreme point now that you've made headway on the children part. And I think much like what you have that illustration, the famous illustration now, of the political shift moving, getting more extreme on the left and alienating liberals, moderate liberals, to the right. I'm seeing a later shift of the right becoming more extreme, alienating a lot of people who were forced to move over to the right, and now becoming like this center that's homeless, because everybody is becoming more extreme, and the rhetoric is becoming,
It's true.
extreme, stupid, just highly partisan. Like, as someone who's trying to be principled, I thought we wanted freedom, and I thought we said canceling people is wrong, right? But now you're trying to cancel people who are on the left. I thought boycotts were wrong, full stop. Now you're trying to boycott things because of the left. So which one is it?
Right.
Are they wrong, or is it only wrong when they do it, and it's cool when you do it? Well, then you're doing the same thing that they are. So that's why I've started calling some of these people the woke right, because they're just as authoritarian. They just switch a noun here, but they're doing the same stuff, the same verbs. I've literally seen. I sent a message to James Lindsay about this, about some of this stuff, but like I've literally seen them advocating for. Oh, damn, I keep forgetting the term. Like, I've seen them talk about like how the left says white people should feel guilty for the sins of the past. And so I've seen them say the same thing on the right, as far as, like, we'll say, because they like to show like black crime videos. Black people should get together and stop this, and they should feel guilty because I was like, wait a second. So are you saying that we should feel guilty for what somebody else is doing?
Still collective guilt.
It's collective guilt. Thank you. I was trying to remember the term, but that's collective guilt. That's literally what they do, right? And they don't see it. Like, you can't tell me you're colorblind and then tell me some collective guilt bullshit in the next sentence.
Well, this is like how these online dynamics work, depending on what group and what message they're trying to convey. Like, you can find so many examples and so many videos that support, what you're trying to say. So, like in 2020, our timelines were just flooded with like videos of police brutality, and it gave the impression that like we're having this like racism crisis. When the reality was that like trend lines showed that race relations were actually better than they've ever been, but people still believed that like there were like thousands of black men getting killed by police every year or something like that, and it was far fewer. But you see the same thing with certain accounts that highlight like the worst people that a group has to offer, as if it's like the norm. It's called like nut picking. So anybody can do it, like, because there's just so many people in the world. There's so many like instances of things happening.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. We have over 330 million people that we know of. Obviously, the southern border situation changes that dynamic. We have a lot of people in this country, and it becomes very easy to highlight just about anything. So not every school, there's a teacher that's trying to trans a kid. There's a lot of schools that involve teachers that are doing stuff that are inappropriate. So, but where's the balance? Where, there's some exaggeration as to things that are happening because it makes people angry. And those anger turns into clicks and all this other stuff. Yeah. So, same thing with the black propaganda stuff, where I've posed this question to people online in right-wing circles that I don't think people understand. Like, this is a right-wing circle thing, because in other circles, they don't do this. In right-wing circles online, especially Twitter, 90 to 95% of the crime videos that they show feature black people. Yet we know in America, not 90 to 90% of crime is committed by black people.
Right.
Let's say it's disproportionately high. That's fine, but not 90%.
Right.
So why is that the case? Are you guys not curious as to why this is the case? That the propaganda is much higher for one group than the other, and no one's curious about that.
Yeah.
You have the same issue in like sort of the gender critical space. You have like certain accounts who, I don't know where they find these videos, but it's definitely not the norm. They probably go into like all kinds of different crazy private groups and things like that and find these like fetish videos of men like dressing up in costumes and doing weird stuff, and they just put it out on their timeline like this is the whole trans movement. This is what you guys are supporting. I'm like, no. I've never seen anybody dressed like that, in public ever. They're just finding like these crazy examples, but there's so many people in the world that like you can find a lot of them. You can put them out every single day, and it makes it look like this is what like the trans movement is. It's a bunch of like perverted men in fetish gear and things like that. And like, sure, there are some people like that, but I wouldn't consider that the norm. I don't think that represents most people who identify as trans.
Yeah, I would have to think really hard if I've ever met somebody. I think maybe 2 people who would identify as trans, right? I'm not looking for them. I'm just in my daily life. Mm-hmm. Yet you would think it's far more prevalent,
Yeah, I think you mentioned about sort of the right-wing authoritarianism that we're seeing a little bit more. I see it in sort of the gender space as well, and like the sort of language policing that's going on there. Mm-hmm. I think it's just this dynamic we're going to see play out in like of the centrist, politically homeless person is going to be forever just going back and forth to whichever side is like pretending to have a big tent, at least as long as they can get enough power to then try to enforce their ideology on everyone. Because I sort of left the left because of this authoritarian sort of group thing, because they had all the cultural power in all the institutions and all that stuff, where they can afford to sort of draw these ideological lines because people are going to shut up because they don't want to be kicked out of the group that is currently has the most power to destroy you if you break ranks. Right. And so some of us all trickled over to like sort of the right because we broke ranks and were permanently exiled. And the right had no choice because they didn't have a lot of power to just have this like, we'll accept your weary and poor, the open tent idea that looked really appealing because, this is great, they're very accepting. But we're seeing the right become a little more sort of gaining cultural power. And as they do that, they have the ability to sort of draw the lines and, we're not such a big tent anymore. And they can sort of have this infighting that they couldn't afford to have before. And so I think, people like us are probably just going to, we're never going to be able to pass sort of the purity tests on either side. And so we're just going to constantly being exiled from one side to the other. Because if the right takes over and now they're super dominant, then the left's going to have to be the open tent party, and they're going to have to be the classical liberal party again. So this is just going to go back and forth.
And it kind of shows that we are making progress on the gender front, because the different factions are now sort of, the rad femmes or gender critical feminists, whatever they want to call themselves, they're putting out all these purity tests now too. So I guess it kind of means that we are making progress because we're gaining more influence. So now they're going after people who don't align perfectly with their views.
No, you're right. There is headway being made. There is progress made. There are less people who are saying that's not really happening when it actually is happening, right? It's more in our face.
I hate when people say that. I still get people in my responses, and they're just like 5 years behind everything. They're just no one's claiming that sex is a spectrum, or they're like, you're just conflating sex and gender.
Oh,
and it's like, I am not. Like, I draw a strict line between these things, or at least I draw a strict line around sex, and then, whatever people can define gender however they want. Let me know how you define it, and then I'll see if I agree with that or the concept makes sense to me. Mm-hmm. But there's still, I still get those all the time. Just like, oh, you're just conflating sex and gender. No one's saying that sex isn't real. Right. It's like, buddy, you need to get with the times. we are way past this at this point. Like,
yeah, you must be new here.
I was just in court with the ACLU lawyer trying to tell me that, sex isn't a real thing because some people have intersex conditions or something. Like, people are definitely denying it. Otherwise, the lawyer wouldn't have been in my face trying to insist that sex isn't real. So,
yeah, there's a lot of gaslighting when it comes to stuff like that. Like for me, I'm not incredibly close to it like you are, but I'm close enough where I've talked to I don't know how many parents, and they're like, yeah, it's in my school. Like when people are saying critical race theory is not in the schools, it's like, now how about all those parents that I just met that have seen the paperwork that the kids bring home for.
Well, that was always a gaslighting, because it's like critical race theory is not taught. Like, well, the legal theory, they're not, you're not getting a college legal course, like, but it's like, the essence of it is being taught there.
It took a year for I think the Washington Post to finally admit that the core concepts from critical race theory aren't being taught to children.
It'd be so easy to point that out if they were talking about some sort of creation of the earth, 6,000 years ago, and in a public school or something. Like, the left would have no problem being like, they're teaching Christianity in our schools, just because we're like, oh well, no, we're not. We're just talking about a person who was born of a virgin, and we didn't say the word Jesus. Like, it's
right.
Just okay, we get what you're saying. You're not literally giving a sermon, but you're still teaching the core concepts of whatever religion. Like, they could see it in that context. It's just they give so much charity to themselves, but when they sort of respond to their opponents with an autistic literalism, whereas they're not literally teaching critical race theory. It's just oh my goodness.
Yeah, his name's not Jesus. It's Jesus.
yeah, stuff like that. Who's Jesus? I know Jesus. That's the type of language games they'll play.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of disingenuous attacks that people throw out there, which I think are hilarious most of the time, because it screams of, you think I'm stupid. Okay, you just think I'm dumb. Okay, cool.
But it works for so many people who weren't involved in politics like me for the longest time.
Mm-hmm.
I trusted everything that I read in mainstream media.
Yeah.
And now I have to reevaluate everything I've ever learned, basically, from them.
Well, that's sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, everyone has their biases, and it's not as much misinformation. It's just they have a narrative they stick to, and they leave so much out, so much important information that people should know. Mainstream media now is just basically public relations for the Democrat Party. I had no idea. I guess it was that biased, but it is.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of people outsource this stuff to trusted news organizations who are supposed to have this journalistic integrity, and and so people, that was better in the past. It's never going to be perfect, but now the whole pretense of this sort of journalistic integrity is just it's thrown out the window. But a lot of people still assume that it's from the New York Times. They wouldn't have let this story get out there if it wasn't totally true.
Right.
They have all the fact checkers. Who might have questioned that whole apparatus?
That's the whole problem with gender affirming care is no one believes that the medical organizations would allow it to happen if it wasn't based on sound empirical evidence, and that's just not the case. It's not where we are.
Well, that's the thing. What they end up using are established institutions.
Yes.
And wearing it like a skin suit for credential validation. So if the New York Times, listen, it's the New York Times. No. It's not the same New York Times that you're familiar with.
Yeah.
This is the skin suit of New York Times, right? This is Weekend at Bernie's.
Yeah, exactly.
New York Times. It's dragging it around and saying gender affirming care.
Using the prestige and the legacy and everything, and then just crapping on it.
So many journalists today are just activists.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just such a shame because, again, that prestige and stuff was so hard earned. Look at Harvard.
Mm-hmm.
Research excellence, just this history, and then activists just take it and put on that skin suit, and they just destroy it so quickly. They wring out every bit of sort of, activist political agenda they can with it,
mm-hmm.
and then then the legacy is destroyed. It's just completely shredded. And they don't care. They're just using it to further their narrow, short-term political goals.
Right.
And it's happening to everything. The journal Nature publishes stuff about the sex spectrum and all this. And it's just to me, Nature used to be the journal I always wanted to get published in. It's every scientist, every biologist, you get a Nature paper, your career is set, like done.
Hmm.
And now to me, it's just like my whole view of nature is like they're captured. They're just an ideological. I mean, they still publish great stuff. It's not all bad. It's mostly good, but they do cater to like the crazy activist fringe.
Anything that intersects with politics.
So every time I say something about the sex spectrum, I get the activist that's throwing in like the Nature paper right in your face. It's just like, oh my God. It's like, do you actually read the paper? Do you understand why it's wrong? Or
Yeah. And I was just like you. I felt like I was just as astute as I am these days when it comes to the media and following it and understanding what it is. I was like that before, but I only got a very small spectrum because I thought the mainstream media was somewhat objective, right? Like I knew then MSNBC is biased, right? But I thought, yeah, they're biased, but they're more truthful, let's just say. But how do you remain truthful when you're that biased? I didn't think about that. And also my issue was I learned about the right-wing perspective through a left-wing filter.
Yes, me too.
And that was a big problem because then when I started looking at the right directly, like the narratives that they would say, whether it be publications, politicians, all that stuff, or just regular people, and I'm like, oh, that's not it. Oh, okay. Like that makes more sense. And so I kind of fell into that same thing. My biggest concern now is that, like, there's a reason why the mainstream media started really becoming overt and catering to one particular audience. And that's because of the internet and the expansion of the internet and people getting information from all over the place, not just select newspapers that are in your town. Or even select newspapers in towns are now competing with national papers, right? Because we could just mail it anywhere or you can watch it and look it out online. So then they just started to have to cater to an audience.
Yeah, I think people also point to like an op-ed, I think in 2016 when Trump was elected, was it 2016? I don't remember.
yeah,
There was an op-ed where someone said like journalists can't be objective anymore.
Yeah.
It was like a Vox article, but I think a lot of people listened to that and felt that like, throw all of your journalistic integrity out the window now because Trump's elected and it's a whole new ball game and we need to tell people how they should feel about it.
Yeah, it wasn't just news outlets too. There were a bunch of scientific journals that came out and endorsed presidents for like the first time in their history. It's just like Scientific American did the same thing. I'm pretty sure. It's like, why is the scientific journal like? Yeah, the editors, I'm sure they have political opinions, but why are they commenting on who should be president or who shouldn't be? Like, talk about just throwing all pretense of objectivity out the window. Even if they all believe that Trump is the evil dictator and he's going to destroy America, it's just like you're a scientific organization. Like, if the editors want to send an op-ed, as themselves as individuals to the New York Times or something, yeah, go for it. But that's not what a journal is supposed to do.
It's not going to work this time around because Trump already was president for 4 years and the world didn't end. So it's like that kind of peer pressure to get people out and say like, it's going to be World War III if you don't vote for Biden. I don't think people are going to buy it.
I go back and forth. Like as we sit right now, I think that Trump might actually lose.
Really?
It sounds kind of crazy, but I just think that Trump is the most divisive political character that I've ever seen. More so than George W. Bush back in the day. And he was pretty divisive, but not necessarily on his character, but more of what he represented. And so that, people were trying to make him seem like the Antichrist and all this other stuff. But I think Trump is legit divisive. You either hate him or you love him, right? It's hard to be passive about Trump. You could be passive about George W. Bush and be like, listen, I vote Republican. I'm just going to do it.
I used to have strong feelings about Trump, and I do not like him at all. But like, I'm not gonna be upset if he wins.
Yeah, I'm not going to be upset if he wins. I just think that there are, because he's divisive, you inspire more people to come out against you. And I think that can work against you.
Yeah.
So
That's
this time around, we've had like 4 years. Like these are the best candidates either party has to offer again.
Yeah.
well, that's what happened last time in the presidential election. Like Democrats didn't come out in droves to vote for Biden. They came out to vote against Trump.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, Biden has deteriorated noticeably since then in his mental faculties. But I mean, Trump is still the opponent, and so, yeah, no one brings Democrats to the polls more than Trump being on the Republican ticket does.
Yeah.
The only thing that I think could turn things over is the fact that it's not during the pandemic, and a lot of people have been feeling all the inflation for the last since the pandemic, and so some people might not be as gung ho about voting for Biden as they would before, or they see Trump as like, well, we made more money, the economy was better under Trump or whatever. But I think it's a toss up. It's
a lot of
completely
progressives
toss-up.
are angry at Biden too for not being more.
Yeah.
What do they call him, like Genocide Joe or something? They want him to be
Oh,
more
the Israel stance? Yeah,
anti-Israel.
that's right.
Well, see that. All right. So that's the thing about progressives. Progressives will never like anybody
Yeah.
unless that person is actually a progressive. So they'll always hate. I don't even want to call them a moderate, but like let's say like blue dog Democrats, right? They'll always hate those people, even if they play lip service to them. Because they're not a true believer. So they'll always go against that particular person. At the end of the day, they'll still vote for him if they're going to vote, right?
I think so.
But they're going to be antagonistic towards Joe Biden. They're never going to really give him credit if there's credit to be due, when it comes to him. So that none of that surprises me.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, that's like when they say the right wing is because everybody's to the right of them.
Yeah.
They're that extreme.
Yeah, they call liberals right wing.
Yeah.
I got called like far right extremist on I think Media Matters.
Right.
I've never voted Republican my entire life. It's like I'm a non-religious. I'm mostly pro universal health care, gay marriage. I think it was a good thing. It's just like are these far right opinions? I don't think so. But.
Well, if you're against them, you must be far right.
Yeah.
That's how it goes.
Yeah.
I think it's more of a statement of where their position is, like your illustration. You're far right because they're that far left.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's actually what's
sort of
going
like a
on.
one-drop rule for them with people who disagree with any aspect of their ideology. Like you're far right if you're not just like completely 100% in on the woke stuff. And so a lot of us just get cast into the far right. We're all the same. Like there's no difference between me and Donald Trump and anyone else, Matt Walsh or whatever. I disagree with Matt Walsh on tons of things, but because we're both talking about gender, it's just like overall the same.
Yeah.
Basically.
You and that devilish woman, J.K. Rowling. But actually, my concern, like I have concerns about the mainstream media, but I'm also concerned about independent media, because the mainstream media, they have money, right?
Well,
even though
less now.
they have
They're
less,
losing.
they're losing money, but they still have pay pigs, right, of corporations
Yeah.
and stuff like that, who kind of prop them up.
Yeah.
But independent media, for the most part, doesn't have money. So they're just like scrapping to get whatever they can get. And so the quickest and cheapest thing for them to do is do rage bait.
Yeah. There is a lot of that.
Yep.
And I'm just like, you guys have an opportunity now to build the media environment that you actually wanted, because you complained about the overt bias and all this other stuff by the mainstream media. You guys are doing the same thing, in many ways worse.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll say at least many of them are honest. Like, if you go to the Daily Wire, it is a conservative outlet. They don't pretend to be anything otherwise. So I'll give them that. MSNBC pretends that they're not. We know that they
The
are.
news outlet side of Daily Wire is great.
Yeah. And that's the thing. But are there... Because I know I don't really read the Daily Wire as far as like the news. But I know I've read for different right-leaning publications And there's like 20% that they leave out of a given story. And I'm like, that's not exactly what happened. Like that 20% is kind of important, but they don't talk about it. They don't give that context.
Yeah, they often, like, in conservative media, they aren't really trying to show like the balanced perspective. They're showing the other side. Like, this is where you're reading in mainstream media. Here's everything that they left out. And I think there is value in that. But it's good that they call themselves conservative media and not try to be pretend anything else.
Right. I just want, in my opinion, and what I'm trying to do with Wrong Speak is to have less bias, right? Give the full picture as to what's going on the best way that you possibly can. Because sometimes what ends up happening is if you make it a full picture, it's not really a story, right? It's only a story if you leave part of it out. Because then it's like, wow, that's wild and crazy. And then you read the story. Like there's so many publications where you read the headline, you're like, whoa, that's insane. Then you read it. And they do provide everything, but it's just the headline is so outrageous.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, that's not really what happened.
I think
You tricked me.
In the environments though, when rage bait is like so, on the up and up, and there is like an alternative strategy of like the honest person who's, no one's free of bias, but you can at least say like, I'm at least honest. Like at least this is what I actually think, and I'm hopefully not captured by my audience. That's what I try to do as much as I possibly can on my Substack, where like I'll have articles I'll publish, and I know that a good segment of my readers aren't going to agree with it, but it's something that I think is interesting and some of the perspective that maybe it would be good for them to, just have upload in their brain, even if they don't necessarily need to agree with it.
Right.
And so I think there is a market for those types of people, because they look around, they see all the rage bait. There is a market for the people who are just like doing their best to be honest, and it usually comes down to like single people though that you can follow. You're like, I follow this person because they're not beholden to some other company. They're just getting funds from their readers, which you can still be captured by your own audience that way. But if like part of your filter is saying that like, no, I'm interested in my audience members being the people who are open to all these different point of views and who will be charitable if I write something that they disagree with, but they're interested in just seeing the other perspective and agreeing to disagree on certain things. I mean, that's what I look for in sort of public intellectuals, I suppose. And that's what I try to put out there on my own Substack for people. And I think Wrong Speak does a lot of that same thing.
Yeah. I mean, publications like ours are out there for sure. There's definitely a market for it. I just think that there's an effort, whether it's overt or just by coincidence, I think there's an effort to demoralize people, right? And they're just getting more comfortable with news is negative. I think it's inherently negative because people pay attention to what's wrong, not necessarily what's good. Yeah. But I think there's a level of like manipulation that's happening to make stories out of stuff that are not stories. Like you actually made a good point. I never really thought about where are they finding these videos of these like weirdo 50-year-old guys who are wearing like doll outfits. Yeah. That's like, that's not something that I would normally come across. You have to go looking for it.
It's not all out there.
Right.
Got to know the weird hashtags to.
Yeah. You have to find the weird hashtags.
You got to find the private groups. You got to gain access to them, and you got to go looking for trouble.
Right. Right. And why would you look for that? It's because it causes a reaction.
And they get a huge platform out of it. It's like, look at the crazy shit I found.
Right. And I'm willing to bet a lot of those, when I really think about it now, I'm willing to bet a lot of those are private groups and not like public Twitter, but just like in the weirdo sector of Twitter, but like in private groups where they're talking amongst themselves who are also, yeah, I like wearing little girls' outfits too. Like, and why would they do that? And I think it's much of that. They're taking advantage of the nihilism that's out there. They think society is crumbling, everything is going wrong, and it makes them paranoid. It makes them paranoid that there's a pervert at around every corner, and that every school is just a quarter of the school is filled with perverts who want to trans your kids and stuff like that. And Are there growing issues? Yes. There are obviously growing issues. Are there problems? Yes. There are always going to be problems. But I think they're taking advantage of a problem that exists and making it seem like it's a much greater issue than it really is by circulating these things. So just like George Floyd happens, all of a sudden now there's all these random police shootings that are ambiguous. They're like, see, it's happening all the time everywhere. And it's like, no, it really isn't. Like when we find the numbers, but it's hard to find numbers on how many perverts exist in society.
That's why you have to look at like trend lines instead of headlines.
Yeah.
I think Michael Shermer said that.
It also like feeds back in on itself because you have this perception that there's a pervert and a pedophile around every corner, even though when like these crimes like per capita are at like all-time lows, and kids are as safe as they've ever been going to the park. Maybe not totally supervised, but people have this perception that they're again like the pedophiles and perverts are in every corner. They keep their kids inside. They do that helicopter parent thing, and then it just forces them to have screens in front of their face, and they get no social interactions, and then
that's what
the mental health issues.
Book is about.
Yeah, and then it contributes to a lot of the stuff I think we're seeing with like the trans stuff and the crazy, even like the CRT activists. Like a lot of this was just a bunch of keyboard warriors going to town.
It's a lot of young people looking for community and identity and finding it in these niche groups online.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right, and this is why I talk so much about parenting and the importance of our role as parents, because if you don't raise them, somebody will.
Yeah.
Whether it be some other 17-year-old girl who's just as confused as your 17-year-old girl and leads her down some path to become a boy, or some 50-year-old man who grooms your child into doing whatever he wants to do with them. Like someone's going to grab your child's attention. And so I think that's why like the deterrence to all of these things is one, awareness that these things are happening. So like when I was a kid, they talk about stranger danger, right? But that was something where you're supposed to talk to your kids and warn them about there might be someone who comes up to you, do not go with them, right? It makes them aware. It doesn't make them paranoid, but it makes them aware if some guy comes up to them and says, your mommy told me to come and get you, and you don't recognize this person, to not go with them. And I think we need to have like the stranger danger when it comes to leftist ideology.
Exactly, yeah.
Oh, yeah. If we had some kind of big education campaign about like what woke ideology is,
Right.
like if we had enough money and power behind like the anti-smoking campaign, everyone would see like this is a terrible way of viewing the world.
Right.
If it was explained, in very simple terms, like what it is, where it comes from, why it's not helpful for society, and what the alternative is liberalism. Philosophical liberalism.
Right.
We already have like a great system in place for dealing with racism, and that's like colorblind philosophy.
Yeah.
I feel like so many of these ideas, like colorblindness, treat
Meritocracy,
everyone as individuals, like
freedom of
that type of
speech.
stuff, or even you're a boy because you're a male, not because you identify a certain way. You don't need to change your body to be who you truly are. All these ideas are really easy to, I think, inoculate your children against, because it just makes such good intuitive sense as well. Like, oh yeah, treating people as individuals, not representatives of their group.
Yes.
Right.
That makes sense, because I wouldn't want to be treated by somebody because of people who happen to share a skin tone with me, did terrible things or whatever. Yeah, I'm a boy because I'm biologically male, but I can still be feminine. I can still, be romantically attracted to whoever I want. Doesn't change the fact that I'm a boy. It's so easy to inoculate, I think, kids against this because it makes sense and it rings true morally.
There should be an education campaign for liberalism.
And I feel most parents don't, either they're not having that conversation with their kids early on when they need to, or they assume they're getting that in their schools when they're clearly not, because of how sort of liberal a lot of these places have become. So yeah, I mean, parents need to take that torch, take the baton. They need to do it themselves, and they just need to like instill from their kids from a pretty young age, just like these basic principles of
And critical
how to
thinking
live
skills.
through the world, and critical thinking skills on top of that. Yeah, for sure.
No. You're absolutely right. We need something like that. And actually, the thing I can think that comes closest to what you're saying, like campaign-wise, is what PragerU does with their videos. A lot of them are very simple
Yeah.
and talk about the ideology in itself. And I think that's the closest thing that I've seen when it comes to like some sort of campaign that explains what you're seeing or explains what communism is, or, you know, explains why this is happening in a very simplistic way. And I think something like that can be really beneficial.
Yeah, but from a nonpartisan source. I mean, people on the left are just taught to not trust anything that comes from the right.
That's the hard part.
Yeah.
The hard part is, I don't agree with PragerU on everything, but I think they have good intentions.
Yeah. No, yeah, he did a PragerU video.
Yeah. And I would love if they invited me to do a video. Because I think what they're doing is actually something that is different than even other right-wing outlets are attempting to do. They're trying to find a way to educate the best way they possibly can and share people's stories. Like when they do the My Stories, I think that's important because it puts a face behind someone. It's not a thing. The reason why the left wins all the time is because they use a story, right? George Floyd was a story, and they use that to galvanize people to push something behind it. That's how you get people to do stuff. You don't get people to do stuff because you say fiscally it's not responsible, blah 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 blah. It's like, no, that's not. You show someone, like, I'm going to talk to Chloe Cole. You use Chloe Cole's story because she's a real person, right? And this real person was affected by something that was real, and you have a face to it, you know. And it's a lot different hearing something abstract when in hearing something from like a real person. Like you can actually see it. It reminds me. I know you say you're not like really into football, right?
Not too much.
Not too much. You're familiar with Ray Rice from years ago, the football player?
I know Jerry Rice.
Jerry Rice? All right. I'll just say real quick. So there's a guy named Ray Rice. He was running back. His career was doing well. He assaulted his wife, right? Newspaper outlets reported that he assaulted his wife. When you do stuff like that, the NFL suspends you. So the NFL got word of it. They suspended him for 3 games. I think it was 3 games, something like that. Suspended for 3-4 games. And mind you, like, it's like a 16-game season, right? So they're trying to make some sort of headway with the punishment. Don't assault your wife. But then I believe it was TMZ released the footage of him assaulting his wife because it was done in a casino elevator.
Yeah, that changes things.
That changes things. Boom, socks his wife in the face. He had never played a game ever again. They knew he assaulted his wife.
Yeah.
But the footage being seen by people is a completely different story.
That's a good point.
So that's where I think, like, someone like Chloe being brave enough to say, I'm a real person. I'm not some abstract person that's on the internet that hypothetically could be affected by this.
She was a trans kid.
Right.
She's what all of the activist organizations claim to support and want to support. And, like, why won't you listen to her?
Right.
Her story's just as important. She was a trans kid too.
Exactly.
Chloe.
This illustrates something that I had experienced when I was doing that testimony in Texas in court. Because our side of things, like, we had James Cantor doing the whole stuff about, different levels of evidence and systematic reviews versus expert opinion, all this stuff. Extremely detailed. They had like an endocrinologist on that was talking about how hormones work, how it changes your body, what happens if you have too much, testosterone in a female body and vice versa. Just like really great stuff, very factual. They had me up there. I'm talking about sperm and ova and gametes and, the upward causes of sex and the downward consequences. And the other side, they just brought up one after another, a kid who was harmed by the restricting trans care, and they just want their care, and they're in these teary personal testimonies. And let's bring a mom who is just trying to get the medicine that the doctor prescribed to her daughter, who's actually her son. They just had a stream of these people that were marshaling out, weren't responding to the amazing, our presentation about standards of evidence or me talking about the biology of sex. It was all just these personal, teary, heartfelt testimonies. And I felt, how powerful they were. And I'm sitting on the opposite side of the courtroom from them. And imagine being like
really
a judge.
believe.
Yeah, imagine
They're
being a
true
judge in there and
believers.
like hearing these things too. Like it's got to affect them. And it's like, that's why we need the Chloe Coles, because our side actually does have those kind of powerful testimonies as well,
Right.
in the Chloe Coles and all the detransitioners. So we need to just be better at, we can't just have the scientists up there being like, here's what evidence means, here's what a gamete is, we need to have the whole package. It needs to be the analytical and the emotional side of things, the story side of things.
Detransitioners just throw a wrench into their whole ideology. If they exist, then, there's no such thing as someone being born trans.
Right.
So it shows that, like, it's not like something permanent. It's gender dysphoria or whatever it is that they're experiencing can be a phase.
No, you're exactly right, there's a mental health aspect to it as well. I've seen so many detransition stories where they say, I was going through something, and everybody just said, yes, you're right, go ahead. And they moved you along. You had an hour, therapy appointment where they just said, you're a girl now? Okay, cool. And they just moved you along. So quickly they were just affirming everything that they were saying, and no one was having them question themselves or asking them, okay, all right, I get it, you feel like you're the opposite sex, but how's your home life? How's school? How are things going there? What are your friends like? Right? Let's just have a conversation. Let's put some delay on this. You have your entire life ahead of you. Let's just talk about this.
Yeah, this is the whole reason that I do this, and I'm doing it for detransitioners. I was them 20 years ago. I'm old, wow. But when I was 15, I was having these same struggles. They didn't have, gender ideology wasn't like in vogue then, and transition wasn't, I didn't know anybody, I'd never heard of it before, but like if it were, like I would absolutely have thought like, oh, that must be it. That must be why I feel so different from everybody else and why I'm struggling so much and why I can't function at the level of my peers. It must be that I'm born in the wrong body. And I was already, pretty gender nonconforming. I wore the same like baggy clothes every day. It would not have taken much to convince me that I was a boy trapped in a girl's body. And I had a lot of mental health problems, and I spent my teen years in treatment centers, not in high school. So like it's the same cohort that's being affected today, but now they're being transitioned and told that they're born in the wrong body, and their doctors are telling them this. So like now the research I do is, I do surveys on detransitioners. I have one coming out pretty soon, next month. And I think the most important finding from this survey was that 85% of the detransitioners I surveyed said that their healthcare professional, the therapists and their doctors, they said that they were, they had a medical condition that required medical treatment, or that they were born trans and they had no control over it. So they're misinforming these young people. A lot of them were underage, or they were in the 18 to 25-year-old range, which is still like they're still just barely adults.
Right.
And you have people in positions of authority misinforming them about the whole nature of their condition. They're not being told that this is a psychiatric thing and you might desist out of it, which 85% of the time they do. That's what we have like a dozen studies on gender dysphoric kids, and most of them just grow out of it. But it's a real medical scandal. Like when you have doctors misinforming your patients, you can't give informed consent. And that's what this whole medical model is sort of based off of, this informed consent model. It's like it's a huge scandal.
So thank you for sharing about your experience as a teenager going through this. It reminds me of, and you've talked to Audra Fasinelli. You know, she's talked about how when she was around that age, she was dysphoric, but like she was being groomed by a pedophile, you know, and there were so many different things that were happening, and it took her a long time to feel comfortable in her body, and she struggled because of these things. And I'm not saying things that are, you know, she's talked about this publicly, so that's what I'm talking about it. But like, I just see like there are a lot of young women who are going through these particular experiences. The benefit was that she didn't grow up in today's day and age where someone's trying to put a medical label on top of it, saying that you need to have surgeries, and that in confirming your confusion rather than trying to make you clear as to how you're feeling and what's going on. So I completely understand your motivation as to wanting to prevent absolute like heinous acts being committed on children.
A lot of them are autistic too, and it took me, you know, until I was 30 to find out that I have Asperger's, and that was sort of explained a lot of my experiences growing up and why I couldn't like function in school and things like that. And that's another whole aspect to this is a lot of women aren't finding out they don't get diagnosed until adulthood, and we have tons of, you know, like really large studies that show that it's not due to biological factors, this discrepancy between males and females getting diagnosed. It's they're being missed. You know, they're better at camouflaging, and they're better at they're more socially motivated than males are. So males often get diagnosed when they're younger, and females don't get diagnosed until they're an adult. So what's happening that I believe is happening is a lot of these girls who are mildly on the spectrum, you know, they know that they're different from everybody else. They, you know, maybe are a little bit more on the shy and creative side, and they're introduced to gender ideology online, and they, you know, misattribute their autistic traits for gender dysphoria because there's a lot of crossover there. That's what my report is about. It's coming out next month.
That
I
becomes
spent
their
8
special
months.
interest.
Yeah, gender identity for a lot of them, trans issues, that all became like their special interest, and they didn't realize until after they detransitioned that like, oh, this was a special interest.
Right.
A lot of them that I spoke to, they didn't get a diagnosis. Once they got their autism diagnosis, they detransitioned because they realized that was it.
Man, I mean, I'm like laughing ironically, even though it's terrible. But we're nearing the end, and I like to ask everybody that I sit down with one question: are you optimistic about the future?
Oh yeah, 2024 is our year.
Yeah,
right.
I think so. I think 2024.
It's off to a great start.
You know, I went to a summit recently. I don't think I'm supposed to say where it was, but the whole thing was that we're now on offense on a lot of these issues, whereas we've been playing defense. We've been on our heels so much. You know, when after the George Floyd stuff, all the universities got set these, you know, these basically Mad Libs, like insert your university name here. Here's all the language you need for all the gender stuff too. It's like, here's the stuff you're going to send to your higher up. This is how everything's infiltrated. Everyone was just pushed back. We had no idea, but now we have organizations that have been set up in the gender sphere, like GenSpect and Do No Harm and all this stuff, where we're actually on offense now. And it's time to put the other side on their heels. And, you know, they can't just say no debate, because, you know, we're going to have those debates, and they need to show up or they're going to look pretty bad. So
yeah.
I think I'm super optimistic about 2024.
And, you know, we keep making the point over and over again because it has to be made that all these European countries, they're aligning their guidelines with systematic evidence reviews, which is, you know, the gold standard in evidence-based medicine. The U.S.-based medical organizations are not doing that. It's all just consensus-based, whatever. But, you know, the more people learn these facts, the more they realize, like, that this whole gender-affirming model of care needs to go away.
It's never been easier to speak up about these issues, I think. So.
And we're not talking about medical transition more broadly. I think, if you are truly informed about the decisions you're making and you're a mature adult, I think it's fine if you feel like you're going to be happier in the long term. I think what we're trying to do, though, is just we want more people to make informed decisions so that there's, less of a chance they'll be unhappy in the long term with their decision to transition.
Yeah. No, and that's...
But they're just not getting the information now because activist orgs have a monopoly on it.
Yeah, and it's time to break up the monopoly. So I'm glad you guys are making headway, and I'm glad you guys are optimistic because...
How do you feel?
Oh, I'm always optimistic. I mean, I think for me, just my personal story as being just a regular guy who's now trying to do stuff like this, like you guys are, being given an opportunity to have a counter narrative on different platforms to talk about these things, and now create a platform where we have a discussion like this and organize with people. I'm very optimistic because if I feel like if I can do it, other people can do it, and other people can do it in small ways. They don't have to have some public platform to do it, but maybe there's something going on in the school. Maybe there's something going on at their office. And a lot of people feel the same way that they do, but a lot of people just wait for someone to stand up and stick their neck out. And maybe you should be the one to stick your neck out.
You should. And just don't read the comments.
No, don't ever read the comments. That was something I learned early on. Don't read the comments because, like, I understand how human beings think. When we see the negative, like one negative outdoes the 100 positives.
Oh, yeah.
Right? It just sticks in your head. They called me a fucking idiot. Like, so, don't read the comments. It's not worth it. If you're comfortable with what you're doing and you're comfortable with yourself, you don't need affirmation. It's good to hear people say thank you.
If you're doing the right thing.
Right. If you're doing the right thing, then some activists calling you a Nazi should not bother you at all. Are you a Nazi? Well, if you're not, then why do you care? Like, it's that kind of thing. So I think that's the best way to move forward, especially online.
People also, I think, are just worried about the online environment, like the permanence of something being written about you online. It's always going to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And I would also say you should not worry about that either.
Yeah. I think people use
if
your...
If it's not real, if it's not who you are, it isn't correct about you, then it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. I mean, I think that's the thing. It's fear. People use your fear against you, which is why, like, people don't want to stick their neck out because they're afraid that something bad will happen. But they also don't see the other side of if you stick your neck out, a lot of good things can happen too.
Yeah. That's
right?
the only way.
It's the only way.
It's the only way for change to happen is if you just, stand out.
No, you're absolutely right. You stuck your neck out, right? And then we got him. We got rid of that bigot. And here you came back with an army of people.
They nearly got me. But I've emerged stronger than I imagined.
You came out stronger. That's why I try to tell people, like, in bad times, that really shows, like, if you rebound from that, you're going to rebound even stronger. Yeah. And so that's what happened with you. Now they created a monster, so to speak.
I haven't told that the best thing they could have done was just to, like, let me continue studying spiders and wasps for the rest of my life.
Right.
Because now I have all the time in the world to just focus on this one topic.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And now with you did much of the same thing. You stuck your neck out, and here you are coming back even stronger and trying to stick to what you feel is right and principled to do. And I think that is admirable. So kudos to both of you.
Thanks.
And you.
I like what you're doing too. Yeah. I see you taking a lot of arrows as well, but
you know what's funny? I don't even notice. I don't read the comments.
Just don't read what people are saying about you.
I don't even read it.
I think when I looked at Daily Wire, a bunch of people made videos about me, and I thought to myself, like, should I watch these? And I'm like, I don't watch their show or care what they think anyway, so I'm not going to.
Right.
Why would I care about what they say about me?
Right, exactly. And then, like, 5 days later, they move on to the next thing, and they're like, Christina who? So that's why I understand the game. That's why I realize when people start talking about you, it's because you're more relevant than they are a lot of times. So you're relevant at the moment and they're not, so they're going to use your name to uplift themselves, right? Because it gets clicks and stuff.
Yep.
Same with you. They're going to use your name to uplift themselves, and it works.
You just have to move forward because you can get lost in all kinds of distractions, and if you get into like debates with people online, it's just going to make you miserable. And there's so much work to be done.
Yeah.
Just ignore them. Just move forward. Just work on the next op-ed or whatever it is, or the next piece of legislation, and just keep pushing forward. Activists be damned.
Yeah, the best advice I could tell anybody is do not engage in bad faith conversations with people. And that's why I like writing and doing op-eds. You get to say everything you want to say uninterrupted, and people can read it or not, right? So go read it. I don't need to debate you. I don't really care if you agree with me or not. I already said my piece, and you can live your life however you want after that.
Clarify if somebody is actually asking a genuine
If it's a genuine question, absolutely. If you want to have that conversation,
really are.
yeah. But if it's anime
Mostly-
avatar calling you a Nazi,
a misrepresentation that
Right.
they're trying to get you to defend. If you made yourself clear, if you made all your points clear, like you don't need to respond to anybody.
yeah, that's exactly it. So leave it be. Because as soon as you respond, you now make them relevant. Remember, you're the person that's relevant in the situation. So, so that's why I don't read the comments. I barely respond to bad faith actors. I try to stick to my principles when it comes to that. Or if I respond, I make a joke.
Yeah.
Because I think it's funny. I was like, why are you talking about me? I'm not that important. But thank you guys so much. I hope you enjoyed your meals.
Thank you.
And I'm sure I'll come back to Nashville. I like Nashville, so I'm sure I'll be back here sometime.
Let us know. You can stay with us for sure.
Absolutely.